The climate crisis is a science problem, so we've been told. It isn't, though. I believe it's a leadership problem. We're not heading toward climate breakdown because we lack solutions. We're heading there because we're using the wrong definition of leadership. Empathy, listening, collaboration, adaptability, the skills that build influence. We've been taught these are soft, nice to have, useful on team days, but optional when things get serious. And in the climate era, that idea isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. Soft things don't break under pressure. They absorb it, redistribute it, and keep going. Water is soft, and yet it shapes landscapes. That's what we've misunderstood about leadership. Today, I want to show you a different way of thinking about it, one that doesn't depend on authority, but on influence, and why that matters to every single one of us. Hi, I'm Emily and I'm 29, young by most measures, but in climate terms, late to work that needed to start years ago. I grew up on a farm here in Cornwall, watching livelihoods depend on weather that you can't negotiate with. I studied business and economics before specialising in sustainability. I trained in translating climate science into real-world action. And for the last 5 years, I've worked inside systems that don't move unless people do. When I first started working in climate, young, ambitious, honestly very naive, I thought that if I wanted to make a difference, I had to rush my way to the top. That impact lived behind a fancy title, a bigger office, a seat at the highest table. That's where I thought change happened. But I was wrong. And here's a confession. I've never had the kind of authority people assume you need to create change. No big title, no team reporting into me, no big budgets, no power to tell anyone what to do. And yet, in the last 16 months, leading sustainability for a 175-year-old brilliant heritage business, real change has happened. Not because I demanded it, but because I learned how to influence, by leaning into the very skills I'd been taught were secondary. Which brings me to the phrase I'd like to challenge. Soft skills. Didn't come from climate science or systems thinking. It came from business culture, a neat little label designed to separate people skills from real work. But language is never neutral. Calling something soft makes it sound optional, disposable, easy to ignore. And that is a dangerous illusion. So here's the idea I want to share with you today. Relational, influence-led leadership, long practiced by women, isn't optional. It's climate-critical infrastructure. And in the climate era, those so-called soft skills aren't soft at all. They're a superpower, and you don't need authority to use them. You need the courage to claim your influence. So as I said, I grew up on a farm here in Cornwall, and I didn't work the land day to day. I was a child. I wasn't up at dawn running machinery or making the hardest calls. Again, I was just a kid. But I watched, and I noticed, and when you grow up somewhere like that, you learn very quickly who the real decision maker is. It's the weather, the soil, forces you can't control. And over time, I noticed something shifting. Seasons began to blur, springs grew drier, winters warmer. Rain started to feel synonymous with Cornwall. Yields, crops and livestock stopped behaving the way they were supposed to. Yields became harder to predict. Margins shrank in an already undervalued sector. Every penny mattered. And when lambing patterns shift because the seasons no longer behave, that's not a failure of farmers. It's a failure of the conditions they're being asked to adapt within. Climate change wasn't abstract from my family. It was something we felt, in the quiet anxiety that creeps in when the forces your livelihood depend on become unpredictable. I didn't call it climate change at the time. I just noticed people paying closer attention, talking things through more, adapting in small, practical ways. What I didn't call leadership then, but absolutely recognize now, was how adaptation actually happened. Not through certainty or command, but through noticing, through conversation, and through collective judgment under pressure. It's only now that I noticed what I was seeing. That was relational intelligence under constraint. And the climate crisis isn't waiting for hierarchy to catch up. And if leadership only belongs to those at the top, we're going to miss the window entirely. Because climate action doesn't fail in boardrooms. It fails in the gaps between people. We've been sold a very specific idea of leadership, haven't we? It's loud, confident, top-down, decisive, often male. Leadership, we're told, comes with a title, a seat at the table, permission, authority. Sustainability has been framed the same way, but let's pause the polite fiction, because if authority-driven leadership actually worked on climate, we wouldn't still be here, because we know what to do. We know how to cut carbon, protect nature, design better systems. What we struggle with is bringing people with us. When leadership is defined only by who holds power, participation collapses, people disengage, and we delay, something the climate doesn't give us time for. What does move faster than authority is influence. Influence doesn't require a job title. It doesn't wait for permission. It acts sideways, quietly, relationally, but through trust, listening, empathy, and care, the things we dismiss as soft skills. But there's nothing soft about changing how people think, nothing soft about shifting systems, and there is nothing soft about holding complexity with courage. Soft skills aren't soft. They're deeply human. And in the climate era, they are a superpower. Because the climate crisis isn't just technical, it's cultural. Like most sustainability managers, I work as a team of one. When I joined St Austell Brewery, I couldn't mandate change, so I had to learn how to invite it. I listened. I learned how the business actually works. I met people where they were, not where I wanted them to be. I spent time where the work actually happened. In our breweries with production managers and engineers, in our pubs with general managers, with our procurement team. I didn't start with carbon metrics and spreadsheets. I avoided speaking in ESG alphabet soup. My boss's voice saying no acronyms lives rent-free in my mind. I asked questions instead. What matters to you? What feels hard right now? What's getting in the way? What would make this easier? What I learned surprised me. People already cared. They were already trying to do the right thing. What they didn't need was someone telling them that they were failing. They needed translation, context, and permission to act from where they stood. Slowly, conversation by conversation, something has shifted. Sustainability has stopped being my job, and it's become our job. Not because anyone was forced, but because they felt trusted, included, and capable. That's influence. Let me show you what that looks like in practice. In the last year alone, together, we've reduced waste by over 100 tonnes, saving more than £60,000. Not through policy or pressure, but through a behaviour change project called Operation Segregation. It was disarmingly simple. We partnered with Biffa to redesign our bin infrastructure. New colours, clearer labels, and bins moved just enough so that recycling became the easiest option, the default. And then we did something else. We invited people to see where their waste actually goes. We took colleagues to a mixed recycling facility so that everyday action stopped being abstract and started to be visible. That project went on to win the UK Green Awards Excellence in Waste Management Award. And then, thank you. And then when we launched our first ever sustainability strategy as a shared story, over 2,000 people started to see sustainability as their responsibility. Again, none of this happened because anyone was forced, because they were invited to act. Here's what the evidence and my experience tells us. The climate crisis is no longer primarily a technical problem. The barrier now is human behaviour. And human behaviour doesn't change because of dashboards alone. It changes because of stories, relationships, trust, and social norms, which means the most important climate work right now isn't happening in our boardrooms. It's happening in conversations, in supplier exchanges, team huddles, on production floors. So I want to put this idea on the table very clearly. Relational, influence-led leadership is climate-critical infrastructure. As essential as technology, as essential as policy, and as essential as finance. Without it, no strategy works, no policy lands, and no transition sticks. And none of this is new. For decades, we've known academically and empirically that trust, relationship quality, and influence shape outcomes far more powerfully than hierarchy alone. And in spite of knowing this, we continue to treat these skills as secondary. What's striking is that women have practiced this form of leadership for generations across cultures, communities, and systems where hierarchy, authority was never offered. When you start to look for it, you see it everywhere. In Indigenous communities, women have long held ecological knowledge, not through titles, but through memory, relationships, and care for land passed between generations. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, women produce up to 70% of food, yet often hold little formal authority. Still, they manage water, adapt crops, and hold community resilience together through informal networks that move far faster than central systems ever could. In Latin America and South Asia, women lead on disaster response, mutual aid, climate adaptation, and land stewardship, not because they were appointed, but because when crisis hits, trust moves faster than authority. In some regions, that trust has led to a cut in deforestation rates by as much as 50%. None of this leadership looks loud, and very little of it gets called leadership at all. But it's the reason communities adapt, the reason they survive, the reason they regenerate under pressure. And because women have historically embodied this form of leadership, it's been feminized, deprioritized, and dismissed as soft. This isn't about putting women in a box. Women lead in every way, including with authority. This is about expanding the definition of leadership, not shrinking it. Because very often, women led this way, not because it was cute, but because it was necessary. When authority wasn't offered, influence became survival. This is leadership that doesn't shout. It weaves. Now, I hold 2 business degrees, but I didn't learn this form of leadership through textbooks alone. I learned it by understanding what it means to lose control and to rebuild it through connection. When power is taken from you, you learn very quickly that force doesn't create change. Safety, trust, and being seen do. When you understand that, not just intellectually, but physically, you change how you see leadership. You stop trying to dominate systems and start trying to move them. And that's why I see this form of leadership everywhere now. In Helen, igniting climate action in our pubs through pure passion. In Laura, using storytelling to shape how leaders see impact. And in Jack, walking alongside suppliers instead of policing them. These women have authority, but when it comes to climate, they don't lead with it. They lead with influence. And that moves far faster than hierarchy ever could. But here's the uncomfortable part. When we ignore relational, influence-led leadership, nothing dramatic happens. There's no crisis meeting, no public failure, no single moment where it all collapses. What happens instead is quieter and far more dangerous. Good ideas move too slowly. Capable people stop offering them. Responsibility gets pushed upward and momentum leaks out of the system. Not because people don't care, but because they don't feel authorized to act. In the climate era, slowness isn't neutral. Every delay compounds risk. Every missed conversation hardens behavior. And every year we wait, the gap between ambition and reality widens. This is how we drift, not through ignorance or denial, but through underusing people already willing to lead. What we call a leadership gap is often just an influence gap, and we created it by only valuing leadership when it comes with power. But influence doesn't disappear when we refuse to recognize it. It either gets used or wasted. And right now, we are wasting it. This isn't nice to have. This is leadership capacity we can't afford to keep sidelining. So let me end where I began. Soft skills is a dangerous phrase because it hides the very capacities we need to survive what's coming. The climate crisis doesn't need more heroes at the top. It needs more people willing to lead from where they stand, using influence instead of force, connection instead of control, and care instead of ego. The leadership we need is already here, in quiet communities, in relationships, and in the quiet influence we underestimate every single day, especially in women. So stop calling them soft skills and call them what they are: infrastructure. Because you don't ignore infrastructure. You build with it, you rely on it, and in the climate era, it is time we did the same. My confession is that I've never had authority, but my conviction is this: you don't need authority to lead on climate. You need the courage to claim your influence. Because the moment we stop waiting for permission, the moment we trust that superpower we already hold, the future doesn't just change, it becomes possible. Thank you.
Thank you.